That's one of the big drivers in that number. Okay. Let's see. Okay, as I said, it is a limit on how much is spent. It is not a limit on how much is spent. It is on how much is spent. It is how it's spent. And what it does is it forces the legislature to prioritize roads over schools, kids, and health care, whether they want to or not. We need the decisions, spending decisions, to be fair among all priorities. There may well be years when most of that money should go to transportation. But there are also years when it probably isn't the best investment. And we believe that we elect folks to make those decisions. They have a better sense of that than we do. We think that that's where they ought to be. Now, they ought to have that authority. How does this help us maximize the stimulus and reduce the length of the recession? Eliminating the 6% limit would allow the federal dollars to be used without a worrying about the effect of replacing general fund dollars. And I'm going to talk about this in a graphic in just a minute. And the general, most importantly, that when the economy starts to rebound, the general fund would be able to, the General Assembly would be able to fill back up the cuts that they're going to have to make during this period. Let's think of this for a minute as total general fund appropriations. This is how much money the legislature spends. This is for the operating budget. This is the stuff for capital, right? This is basically the 6% limit. Well, we had an economic downturn. We can't spend up to that level of appropriation because we don't have the money. That's just a fact of life. That's going to happen sometimes, and that's where we are. So this is where we are in general fund appropriations. If the legislature cuts right now to the current level of general fund to comply with our constitutional requirement of a balanced budget. But in comes the federal stimulus dollars, right? Federal stimulus dollars says, hey, we don't want you to have to make all those cuts because we know that public spending actually is good for the economy. Puts money in the hands of folks, keeps people working, et cetera, et cetera. So we've now filled up to this level with appropriations from the Federal Recovery Act. We didn't make it all the way up to where we had originally appropriated in 2009, but we're darn close. This is the way it works in Colorado and in every other state in the country. But in every other state in the country, after 2 years, when the federal stimulus money goes away, the economy of the state is starting to rebound. It fills that back up. But in Colorado, we're stuck here because of the Arveschoug bird limit. Even though we know revenue, I mean, we don't know this. We sure hope that the economy will recover at some point. But we know if we don't fix Arveschoug bird, regardless of when that is, we're going to be stuck at the lowest point in the recession and not be able to restore those cuts. That's the ratchet. Now, how does this improve Colorado's future? We think it allows the legislature the authority to make some decisions about what they do with their money. We have seen this before. We've seen this phenomenon before. It happened last time we had a recession. So bear with me for a minute. This black line here represents where service levels would have been had they been allowed to grow at the rate of 6% every year since 2001. So that's just a straight line projection of services. Okay? That's all that is. They weren't allowed to grow at 6% for a couple of reasons. One is because we didn't have the money. And the second reason is because of the ratchet. Initially, it's because we don't have the money. You see, this ratchets down. You can't spend more money than you have. And so now our base ratchets to here. We have a new low point at which we can grow by 6%. And that's represented in the red line going forward. You see, in these years, we would have actually had the dollars to recover back to where we would have been on the 6% line. But that money couldn't be spent on K-12, higher ed, healthcare, et cetera. That money all went to transportation and capital construction. And we project the same thing happening again with the current recession. This is the line going forward from the ratcheted base. This shows the cuts that we're going to have to make. And this would grow it from the lowest point out. Do we get back all the way up to the even ratcheted base? No. But by as soon as 2012, the money that we could have been using to restore the cuts that we are taking now will automatically be transferred to transportation. I'm not actually here, this funny little line up here represents the TABOR limit. I want to be clear to everybody that we are able, this is all money we're allowed to keep under the TABOR limit. We're still limited by growth and inflation plus population, but that's what this number looks like. This is money that we're allowed to keep, even with the constraint of growth in revenue by inflation plus population. I'm going to go back to this chart for a second. I thought there was another chart there. I can't remember which presentation I'm using today.
Hey, Carol.
Yes.
Can you just tell us how much the gap represents?
Well, this gap between the old ratchet and the new ratchet is just over $1 billion, about $1.1 billion. So we are at about $1 billion low. Even if we hadn't had to ratchet again, when we get out of here to 2011, we would have still been, this is over $1 billion. We take the new ratchet, and it's over so I think $2.4 billion. In fewer services we're providing to Colorado families in 2012 projected than we did in 2002. Now maybe that's the state we want. Maybe that's the direction we want to go. But we think that this is a question that we need to put on the table and make sure that people understand what's going on. We also think it points out some other issues about whether or not we actually have enough revenue, but that's a debate for another day.
Carol, could you talk about, if you go back to that pie chart with the general fund, what the state budget cuts are projected? And as Carol said, we project out how much income we think we're going to bring in, how much revenue, and then they update that. So the next update comes out March 20th, right? And when we don't hit that number, we cut in this current fiscal year. So
right.
This fiscal year ends the end of June,
Correct.
correct? So because the income projections have come in lower, how much are we cutting out of the general fund this year, and how much are we cutting of that $7.7 billion next year?
This chart represents the original appropriations for 2009, so the year that we're
right.
working in.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. I'm sorry. I get confused with my fiscal year sometimes. And so what we're looking at now is that this piece is now about $800 million less than this. So the December estimates, the estimates they're currently working on, is cutting about 800. Isn't that right?
What? So you said 200 million in your last presentation. It was 200 million this year and 800 million next year.
But because that's let me go back. It's about 600 million in reduction in revenue. The way they've arranged the cuts, it's $200 million in fiscal year 09 and $800 million in 10. And how they can do that little magic is, remember the taking from the reserves and taking from cash funds? So they're pulling one-time money into 09 so that they're looking at about $200 million in reductions in 09 currently.
That's without the March 20th projection.
That is without the March 20th projections. And if I were a betting person, I'd say they're going to be down another $300 million. Now, what they will do with that is they'll probably do a little more fancy finagling and redoing, sort of
So we're going to be cutting $1 billion out of $7 billion, which percentage-wise is what, 16%, 17% cut. I know, I'm an engineer. So, but yeah, 18%, 15. So we're going to be cutting 15, and when the economy rebounds, we can't grow it back by 15. We can only grow it back by 6
each year. And the 6% is actually smaller because it's 6% of a smaller base.